Welcome to Crackit. Today in this video we are going to discuss how we can process a millions of record using the Spring Batch. So we are going to see a live demo wherein we have like number of records in an Excel sheet and we are going to process those records into the database. We are going to save those records into a database using a Spring Batch. We have a live code demo for this. We are going to type the code and we are going to understand how we can use Spring Batch in our application and how Spring Batch is useful to process those millions of records. That's what we are going to see today. Why do we need a Spring Batch? So before we understand why do we need a Spring Batch, let's try to first understand when do we need a batch job. So if I have a huge volume of data and I need to process that data, then I'll go for the batch job. So if I want to process a huge volume of data in a group but with a minimal interaction, then I'll use batch jobs. Next is Spring Batch. So then why do I need to use the Spring Batch? It is like Spring is a framework and that offers a lot of features for this processing of the batch jobs with the traditional batch architecture, and it's lightweight as well. That's the reason we can go for the Spring Batch jobs. So Spring Batch, it is a lightweight comprehensive batch framework that is designed to the development of the robust batch applications which is following the traditional batch architecture. And all these features Spring Batch is supporting. So what are these features of the Spring Batch? It supports transaction management. It supports chunk based processing. Yes, if I have millions of records, if I want to do it as a chunks as hundreds and hundreds, yes, I can go ahead and do using this Spring Batch. So it supports chunk based processing. It's declarative IO. It's easy. I just need to tell Spring Batch what needs to be done and how it needs to do. That Spring Batch will take care. So this is a declarative IO, and there is a features of starting the job, stopping the job and restarting the job if it didn't run it before properly. So all these features, yes, Spring Batch supports, and there is a mechanism for retry and skip. If I want to skip few records in my input, yes, Spring Batch is supporting that. There are few failed records and I want to retry that. Is there any way? Yes, Spring Batch is supporting that. So all these features Spring Batch is supporting. That's the reason we can go ahead and use Spring Batch for our any batch processing. Before we write code for the Spring Batch architecture, before we write code for the Spring Batch and before we do the code demo from moving all the records from the Excel to a database, let's try to understand what is a Spring Batch architecture and how it works. So if we understand this Spring Batch architecture, it will be easy for us to write code. Let's try to first understand the Spring Batch architecture. So Spring Batch architecture, let's try to first focus on this part. This is the main part to which we are going to write the code. So let's try to first understand just this part, and all these I'll explain it in the later. So Spring Batch is nothing but a job. Yes, Spring Batch is a job and that job will have multiple steps. So I will split my job, or I can split my job into multiple steps. So one job will have many steps and each step again internally will have three things. What are those three things? Item reader, processor and writer. So what is this item reader? In our code demo which we are going to see, we are going to process the multiple records in the Excel which is in the file system too, and we are going to process it and we are going to move it to the database. So this item reader will read the information or read the data from Excel in our example, and if I need to process that data, that item processor will take care, and I am going to write it in the database. So who will write it in the database? Itemwriter will write it in the database. So mainly we are going to write a job, and that job may have multiple steps, and for each of these steps we are going to write item reader, item processor and item writer. So this reader will read the data from my Excel sheet and it will process the data if I need to process anything, and it will write it to the database in our example. So we understood all these parts. So this is the data source. From the data source we will read and we will write, and like all these things we understood what it is. Next, if there is a job, someone should start the job. So who will be starting my job? And that starting is by the trigger to the job launcher. So this job launcher will start my job. So how will my job now execute? These are the how will my job now execute? My job will execute with multiple job instances. So each job may have multiple job instances, and the information about all these job instances will be available in the job parameters. My job started, how is it starting? Internally in the Spring Batch architecture, it will have multiple job instances, and the information about all these instances will be present in this job parameters, and all will be saved in this job repository as well. So this job instance, when it started its execution, then which is nothing but the job execution. So in this job execution, we know whether the job, what is the status of the job, whether it is running or not, when will this job will get started, when this job will get end, what is the current status, whether it got exited or not. All those information will be present in this job execution. Also, we can see all those information in the job repository as well. So we will have metadata about this job and step in this job repository. I'll show you that these things as well in our demo. So what is this step execution? Now all the information about my step will be present in this step execution, whether the step is currently executing or not, whether the step got exited or not, what is the current status of this step, what is the start time of this step, what is the end time of this step. All those information will be stored in the step execution. So this just job execution and this step execution is like mainly when there is some issue and for some reason my job or my step got stopped, we need to analyze why that had happened. So for that we will use this job execution and the step execution. So coding wise, just remember we are going to write a job with multiple steps, and each step is going to have item reader, processor and writer. That's it. So let us start creating the code for the Spring Batch demo. So for this I am creating a project from the scratch. So I have opened Spring Initializer and I have chosen the language as Java, and the project, the dependencies that I am going to create is using the Maven dependencies, and I am using the latest stable version of Spring Boot, which is 3.2.5, and I have given my artifact name as Spring Batch demo, and I have chosen the packaging as jar, and the version that I am using is Java 17. And what are the dependencies that I need? The dependencies that I need is Spring Batch. It is because we are developing a Spring Batch demo. Obvious that we need the Spring Batch starter, so that's why I have added Spring Batch dependency. And we are going to save the data that is in the CSV too, and we are going to save it in the database. So we have a CSV file, and we are going to save all the data that is present in that CSV file to the database. So we have to process all the millions of records. In our case, in our example, it's 1000 records. So we are going to save all those 1000 records that is present in the CSV file to the database. So since we are using the database, I am using Spring Data JPA here, and the database that I am going to use is Postgres. So I need a driver for it. That's why I have added PostgreSQL driver. And I am going to expose a endpoint to trigger my job. That's why I am using Spring Web to expose my RESTful API endpoint. And I'm going to use Lombok for simplicity, just to avoid the boilerplate code. So all these dependencies I need, and that's why I've added it. And now I'm generating a project. So I just want to tell you that we are using a latest version of Spring, latest stable version of Spring, which is 3.2. So we are going to see the demo for the latest Spring Batch project. So this is like very latest. It's not like 2.7 or 2.8 wherein we are generating the batch. No, it's not the case. We are using the latest version of Spring, which means we are creating the Spring Batch. We are going to see how we can create the Spring Batch project using the latest Spring Boot 3 version, not Spring Boot 2. It's Spring Boot 3. So I have imported the project in the IntelliJ, and you can see that all the dependencies are present in our pom.xml. So all well and good. So this is the CSV file that we are going to process. I have taken the CSV file from the internet, and you can see that this has the employee information, employee ID, full name, job title, department, business unit, gender, ethnicity and age. And you can see that it has 1001 records including this header. So it has 1000 records. So we are going to process all these 1000 records. We are going to save all these 1000 employee information into our database. The database that we are going to use, as I told earlier, is Postgres. So I have made few changes in my application.yaml file. I'll tell you all those now. So let me just take this. Okay. So I'll explain this. So here you can see that we have added the data source information. So Spring data source, you can see the indentation here, Spring data source. We have added the data source information. which is nothing but, as I told earlier, I'm going to use Postgres and my DBS Spring security. So that's what I'm going to use. And I have added few JPA related configurations. So what are these JPA related configurations is nothing but I want to create the table only when I start the application, and if I stop the application, I don't want my table anymore, so it will drop the table. So that's why I've provided create drop. Since I'm just going to use this table for the demo, that's the reason I have provided it here. And I want to format the SQL, and I want to show SQL in my console. So all these properties I have like simply added JPA properties. And this one I'll delete it for now. That is a Spring security configuration, so I don't want that, so I have deleted it. Let me come to this thing. This is like very important. You need to have in your project. One is JDBC initialize schema : always. So for our Spring batch to get initialized, we need this property. So then only our application or the Spring application will consider this as a Spring batch job, and it will do that. So we need this property Spring batch JDBC initialize schema : always. This should be present. And you can see that I have given Spring batch job enabled : as false. It is because I don't want my job to run when my application is starting up. Instead, I am going to create a controller, and only if I trigger my controller, my job has to start. So for the demo that I'm going to show, I need this property. But in your case, if you want your batch job to get started during the application startup, you can do this. But usually we will have a trigger and we will enable it, and that's the reason I am providing Spring batch job enabled : false. So these two properties are related to Spring batch. So we need to have these two properties. If we don't have this, we will face some issues. So it's mandatory that you need to have. This one is based on your requirement, whether you need to set up that batch job during the application startup or not, that you have to decide. So this one is okay, but this one you need to have in your application YAML file. So these are the things that I have added. And let's start writing the code now. So we have the CSV file, and in the CSV file, also one more thing I forgot to say, I have added that CSV file in this resources folder. So we are going to create an entity for this. So because we are anyways going to save it to the database, to saving it to the database, we need to have an entity class. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an entity class, and I'm going to call it as employee entity. So all well and good. I'm going to create an entity to save it to the database. So I'm going to create at entity. I'm going to create a builder class for it if it is required in future. I'm going to give at noargs at allogs constructor, and I'm going to give the table name as maybe employee underscore details. So I have provided all the information, and and we need to create all these fields in our table. So let's create it really quickly. So we need an ID. If it's an entity, it's mandatory. So let's create it quickly. And yeah, I'll create it really fast. I have it here. So I just copied it. So we have all these fields in our entity, and we have created our entity class. So at entity is an annotation that is used to mention that this class is an entity. Builder is to create an object easily, as you know, and I didn't have any constructors here. I'm using the Lombok annotation, and that's why I've added just like this. So we have created our entity class. Next, what do we need to do? So let's go to the workflow, and let's see, meaning the architecture, and let's see, and I'll show you what are we going to create first. Step by step, what are we going to do? First, as per the architecture, we need a job, and that job will have multiple steps, and each step will have item reader, processor, and writer. So we already have a Excel file. So we have copy pasted that to our code. That part is done. Then what do we need to do? We need to read that Excel file. So to read that Excel file, first what we will do is we will create an item reader. So that is what we are going to do first. Then we are going to create an item processor. So processor, I'll explain you what we will do in the processor. It's not a mandatory step to have a processor, but if we need to process that data, then we need it. So I'm going to give a very simple example in our demo. So we will create a processor. Second step, to process the data that is present in the CSV file. We will use this processor. Then we need to write the data to the database. Database is already present. We have configured that in our application YAML file. So that is all ready. So we have Excel, we have database. We are going to create these three now: item reader, item processor, and item writer. So after we create all these three, we will create a step, and after creating the step, we will inject that step into the job. Let's see all these things in code now. So before all that, I'll create a package with name entity and move my entity class to that package. Sorry, I have created it directly here. So I'll move it here. I'll do a refactor. So my entity is now in my entity package. So then what are we going to do? We are going to create an item reader, writer, and a processor. So I want to create all those item reader, writer, and processor in my config class. So so for that config class, I'll create a config package. So I've created a config package. So inside that package, I'll create a class, and I want to name it as Spring Batch Configuration, for example. So I'm creating a configuration class. So I'll add this at configuration annotation here. So why are we adding at configuration annotation here? Because I'm going to define multiple beans here. So if I'm going to define multiple beans that are interrelated, then I need to use this at configuration annotation. So if you want to know more about this at configuration and at component annotation, we have already covered a video for this. I'll provide that link in the comment section. You can go through if you want. So we have deep dived on when to use at configuration annotation, when to use at component annotation in that example, in that video. So I'll pin that in the description. If you want, you can use it. I'll also provide the link here if possible. So next, what are we going to do? We are going to create our beans. The first thing that we are going to create is, as I told earlier, we are going to create a reader. So we are going to create a reader. So for that, I'm going to create a bean. So I'll create a reader. So what is the reader that I'm going to use? The reader that I'm going to use is flat file item reader. So the reader that we are going to use is a flat file item reader. It is because this is the reader for reading the CSV files. So in our example, we are going to read a CSV file. That is why I am creating a flat file item reader. So, and in the definition of the flat file item reader, you can see that we need to provide a generic. So for that generic, we don't have any DTO classes. That is nothing but we have to create a DTO that is similar to that of an Excel. So we can create a direct Excel and process the data as well, but for in the production like applications, usually we will create a DTO. So what I'm going to create is, I'm going to create an employee DTO. So why am I creating the employee DTO? That DTO is nothing but that DTO is will look similar like the same Excel sheet, this CSV file. So this CSV, we are going to convert it to a DTO just for the look wise and for the code to look like a better, like a, what is it, the production code. So that is why we are creating it, and you can see that this flat file item reader is accepting a generic, and that generic we are going to create, and that is nothing but employee DTO. So what I'll do is, I'll create employee DTO, and this, as I told earlier, this is the reader that we are going to create. For now, let's first create the employee DTO. So let's create an employee DTO. I'll create one folder called a package called DTO, and inside that DTO I want to create this employee DTO. So for that employee DTO, I want to create it as a record, because it's we are using Spring Boot 3 and we have record. It's very easy if we use record, so that's why I'm going to use record for all the DTOs. It will be easy if we have records. So if you want to know more about records, we already covered a video on how to use records in a Spring Boot application. I'll provide that link also in the description. You can go through it if you want it. So I'll provide that link in the description. So for all the DTOs, in that video we have covered what are the benefits of using records in the Spring Boot application as well. So for all the DTOs, it will be better if we use DTOs, and that's the reason I'm going to create a DTO here. So, and in the DTO, I'm going to have the fields similar to that of the my Excel. So I have created all those fields quickly. So which is like the same, all these fields that is present here will be present in this DTO as well. This DTO is to represent this Excel file. So I have created that quickly, all well and good. So this reader thing is all fine. So we have to write the code for this reader now. So from this reader method, what are we going to return? We are going to return a flat file item reader. So for that, what are we going to do? We need to create a flat file item reader and we need to return that. So for that, what we are going to do? We are going to use something called as the same thing, flat file item reader builder with employee DTO as its generic, because for our flat file item reader, employee DTO is the generic. To create this object, I am using the corresponding builder class. So I am using the corresponding builder class, and let's see what and all it has. So it has like few properties. You can go through all the properties when you have time, but I'll tell you few of the properties which we need to set for our example. So what I am setting is, first what I am going to set is, the first one is lines to skip. So why do we need to use this line to skip? So in our employee sample data CSV, you can see that we have a header added as a first row. So since my header is a first row, I don't want to process my first row when I am going to save it in the database. I am going to save only the data and not the header. So I need to skip my first line. That is why I am providing it as line to skip as 1. So if I give it as 1, it will skip the first row. So I want to skip the first row, and that's the reason I am giving lines to skip as 1. Then do I have any delimiter? Yes, I have delimiter. If you see here, my delimiter here is comma. We are using a CSV file which is comma separated file. So I have a delimiter, and that delimiter is nothing but comma. So if I go inside this delimiter builder, so this delimiter builder, if you see, this is to construct the delimiter line tokenizer, and in this delimiter line tokenizer, you can see that the default delimiter they are using is delimiter comma. So that is the reason I am not providing any delimiter here. But if you have any other delimiters in your file other than comma, you can always do that by providing delimiter.delimiter of whichever delimiter you want to send. But in our case, I am not doing it because the default delimiter that this delimiter builder going to return is comma, and I am using a comma separated file, and that's the reason I am not using that delimiter. And next, what are we going to do? We are going to give a name to our we are going to give a name to our builder. So we are going to give a name to our builder. What is that name? That name we can give whatever name we want. So I want to give it as a employee item reader. So all done. I have provided the name as well. So we need to tell this Spring Batch, this reader, that it has to read this file. So we need to provide that information. So for providing that information, there is something called as resource. So from where it needs to get that resource, that information we need to provide. For that, for now, just leave it with me. I'm pasting some code here. I'll explain this piece of code later. So leave it with me. In this code, if you see, what I have did is I have passed one parameter to that reader, and that parameter is file system source. And there what I have provided is like from where will it pick that file system source? It will pick the parameter of job parameters of input file path. So leave it with me. I'll explain this piece of code later. Just understand that we are passing one parameter to this reader method, and that parameter is file system resource. So what is this file system resource? This has, if you see, path, file, and the file path. So we will provide our file path and the file in this file system resource, and we are going to use that file system resource here. So from where will it pick? It has to pick it from employee sample underscore data from this resources folder. So I will provide that information later. So like I'll provide that information later, but for now, try to understand. I have provided a value here. I'll explain it later. So we have provided the resource as well. Then what else we need to do? We need to provide the names. So what is this names? Let's go check what is this names. This names is nothing but the name of each of the fields within the fields that are written in the order they occur within the delimited file. So within this delimited file, what and all is present. So what we need to provide that name here. So in this names, what and all I have in my CSV file, I have to provide all those names here. So I'm quickly copying it here. So I have provided all the names. Then what do I need to do? I need to provide a target type. What is my target type? My target type is employee DTO. Yes, my flat file system item reader builder is going to convert my CSV file into this employee DTO object. So each row of that file will get converted to a employee DTO object. So my target type is employee DTO dot class, and let's create that object. All well and good. Hope this is clear. So what are we doing here? We are creating a reader. So that reader, what is that reader? That reader has some input file system resource. So we are going to process that input file system resource. So we have provided that resource here. We are telling that skip the first line of your CSV file. We have just provided the name as employee item reader, and the delimiter that we use is a comma separated, and that's why we have just given it as delimited. And these are the what is it? These are the names that are present in the CSV file. We have to provide it in the same order. Yes, we did it. And what is our target type? Our target type is employee DTO class. So for each rows in the CSV is going to convert it into a employee DTO object, and we are building that object and we are returning it. So our reader is returning me a flat file item reader of this type employee DTO. All well and good. I have created my reader. Then I am going to create my processor. So we are going to create our processor. So at bean public item processor. So what my processor has to do, I'll tell you. My processor, I'll open this processor. So you can see that I is input of the item and O is the output of the item. So what is my processor going to do? My processor is going to convert my employee DTO object, which I am going to send into my employee entity. That is what I am going to do with this processor. So what is this processor doing? It is going to accept employee DTO as input. As you can see here, I is the input, and it is going to give me employee entity as the output. So why is it returning me employee entity? It is because if I need to save my content to the database, I need to have that as an employee entity. So from the file, I read all those information. I have converted it to employee DTO. In the processor, what I am doing? I am converting my employee DTO into employee writer. In the writer, what will I do? I will save this employee entity to the database. That's what we will do. Hope this is clear. So in the reader, what did we do? We read the CSV file and we have stored it to my employee DTO object. And in the processor, we are converting the employee DTO object to the employee entity. And what are we going to do? We are going in the writer, we are going to save that entity to the database. So I'll just name this as employee processor, item processor, and I'm going to create new employee processor class. So I don't want to define that bean here. Instead, I'm going to create a new class. Yes. So we are going to create the class in the same package. I'll implement the methods. So you can see here, ideally this should return item processor. So when I've created a class, that class by default implements item processor. And if we need to implement the item processor, we need to override the method, which is nothing but the process method. So it is our wish if we need to process anything or not. So what I'm going to do, I'm just for the information, what I'm going to do is, just for the example, this demo purpose, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to give it as employee DTO. Yeah. So if the employee DTO dot get maybe I'll give it as job title. This is a record, that is why we don't have a getter. By mistake I said it as a get. So if you see, we just have, it is not get job title, it is just the job title. It is because we are using records. In records we will not have getters. Instead we will have job title. The method name will be the parameter name. So employee DTO dot job title dot equals of, I'll just give it as, what is it, vice president. Then please skip that record. I don't want to process my record if my employee DTO's job title is vice president. So this is just for the demo purpose I'm showing it. You may have different business requirement in your application. This is just for the demo purpose. So for my demo, what I'm doing, so in my CSV file, if if the job title is vice president, please don't process that record and save it in the database is what I'm giving. So for example, if you see, this E00549 should not get processed. That's what I'm doing it here. And then what do we need to return? We need to return the employee entity. So that is what we are going to do in this processor. So for that, what I'm going to do, I am going to map employee, pass that employee object, and I need to return the entity. For that, instead of writing the method here, for clean and neat code, I have written the method. So what I'm going to return, I'm going to return the employee entity. So it's just a mapper class. So employee dot employee builder I want to use. Oh sorry, employee dot builder. Yeah, what is the problem here? Dot, oh my bad, sorry. So employee dot builder, and I can populate all the values that I want. So for the employee ID, I'm going to use employee DTO dot employee ID. For I want to do it as quick. I don't want to waste your time, guys. So I'll just copy paste this piece of code. So all well and good. What did we do in the processor? In the processor, we need to convert our employee DTO object into the employee entity. So for that, I have written a method that is map employee, and inside that method, I am converting my record into my employee entity class. Also, I have added one more condition. What is that condition? If my employee DTO's job title is vice president, please skip that record. Don't process it. That's what I have did. So all well and good. I'm going to my, where is it, configuration class now to write our writer. So next is we are going to create our writer as I told earlier. So we are going to return writer from this method. So let us create our writer. So I'll name this method as employee writer and let it be here. Meanwhile, we can create our writer class. So for that, before that, I want to tell you that if we are going to write it in the database and if we are using JDBC, we obviously need a repository, right? But we didn't create our repository yet. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'll first create my repository class. Repository, yes, and inside that repository, let us create our interface, which is nothing but employee repository. Repository, yes, let's create it. I'll annotate it with repository annotation, and we are going to use JPA repository, and our class is employee, and what is our ID type? Let me check one more time. Sorry, it's string, so let us change this to string. All well and good. We have created our interface. So if we are creating if we are going to write it to our database, we need an employee repository, and that is why I am using that repository here. I'm going to create our new class for the employee writer. So for that employee writer, meaning the item writer, we need to let the item writer know that to which repository it needs to save. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass this repository information to my writer. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create new employee, employee writer of, and I'm going to create a method with employee repository. So let me create this class let me create this class, and you can see that it has created a constructor with employee repository as its argument. So but I don't want to create my constructor like this. Instead I am going to use Lombok, and I'm going to auto wire that class here just for the loose coupling. So final, what is it? Employee repository. Yeah, employee repository. So what will happen? This at required args constructor will create the employee writer's default constructor with employee repository as its argument. Yes, I have created it, and what do I need to do? I need to implement item writer. So with employee as its entity. So if you remember, here we are returning item processor. Likewise, here we need to return the item writer. So for that we need to implement this item writer class that is present in the Spring Batch. I am implementing it. If I am implementing that interface, I need to override the method. So that method is nothing but this write method. What are we going to do in this write method? In this write method, we are going to save this employee entity to our database. So if you are going to save the employee entity, obviously we need to use this employee repository. So here if you see here, I'm using the save all method. So save all method, you can see that it is entities, not a single entity. It will save all the entities that I am passing. So here if you see here, we are sending it as a chunk is like a group of employee objects. So we are passing a chunk of employees, and all those chunk of employees will be saved to the employee database in a single stretch using the save all method of the JDBC repository. So we have to pass that employee chunk here, and I am saving it. That's it. So I've finished my item writer as well. So if we come to our class, we have written our reader, which will read the Excel file and convert it to the DTO. And again, this processor, what will it do? It will convert my employee DTO object to my employee entity object. And if I have any other business requirements to add, I can go ahead and add it. And now you can see that I have an employee writer class, and that writer is to save my employee entity to the database. So we have created our item reader, processor and writer. Next, what are we going to do? We are going to create our step. Yes, because step consists of three things, and those three things we have created. Next, we are going to create a step. So let's create our step. So for that, as usual, so how we written item writer here, how we are returning item writer and write item processor here. Out of this method, we are going to return a step. So step is also from the Spring Batch, and I'm just going to give this method as employee step, and we are going to return a step. And to return a step, we have some class called step builder. So we are going to use that step builder. So if you see here, there are two implementations of step builder. One is deprecated, we are not going to use it, and the another we have. So what is the other one? It is the job repository, one with the job repository. So we need to pass that job repository class from this step builder. So we need the job repository. So what I'm going to do is, job repository, we are not going to do anything. It is present already in the Spring Batch. I'm just going to auto wire that in my configuration class. So I need job repository. Also we need the transaction manager. So I'm creating the transaction manager as well. We need data source information. So all these we need to define here. It is transaction manager is to perform the transactional operations in the Spring Batch, and the data source is like, as we know, it needs to know where it needs to save the data, that Postgres information, that also we need to provide. All these information we need to provide. That is why I have provided all these three as a instance parameters for this class. So by default it will auto wire all these, and it will create if it is creating an object, it will use this for its constructor. Already we have a required args constructor, so it will create out of it. So we need a job repository and the platform transaction manager to to why is it needed to for the transactional operations in Spring Batch, and we need data source information as well. So I have auto-wired all these things, and this what is it, for this step builder as well we need job repository. So I'm going to add that here as one of the parameter. So final, because we need that final job repository, yes, I will add that as well, repository. And what else do we need? Let's come, we need to define the chunk information. For chunk, we can, if you see here, the implementation of this chunk, so we are going to use int comma platform transaction manager. That is why I have created the transaction manager there, because we need to pass that transaction manager here for our chunk. So if you remember in this writer, we are getting this chunk object, right? For that chunk, we need to define how many rows make a chunk. For example, I am providing it as 100 here, and I am going to pass that transaction manager here. So what I'm going to do, final platform transaction manager, and I'm going to pass that transaction manager here. So next, what are we going to do? We need to define what is our reader for our step. So we have already defined that reader. So we are going to just use that reader method here, and to our reader method, we need to pass some variable. What is it? We need to pass this flat system resource. So instead of me passing it here, I have already defined that variable here. Anyways, as I told earlier, when I was coming to this job parameters concept, I will explain it. For now, let us give it as null here, because it will pick the value from the job parameter itself when I trigger the job. I'll explain it later. And we have our processor defined, which is nothing but the item processor. It's simple, yeah. And we have our writer as well. So we are going to define our writer. To our writer, we need to inform which is our repository. So we need to, we need to inform our repository. So that repository as well, we will take it from here. So let's add the repository information, which we already know, which is nothing but the employee repository, and we will pass that employee repository to our writer, which is employee writer of employee repository, and then we can give it as build. So let's see here, there's some issue. What is it? It is expecting an item processor of employee DTO comma employee. So let me first go inside this thing and see what we have written in our employee processor. So okay, let me add at component annotation. Sorry, I've missed it. You can add that. I didn't see any other issue. I don't have anything what is it? Okay, let me add at required args constructor as well. Even then I'm getting this issue. So what is it? Okay, I think so. In the step builder step, we have input and output defined as INO. And yes, that is why it's saying I think. So what I'm doing is, let me do it, typecast it. What is my input? My input is employee DTO, and this is employee object. Yes, it is because I'll show you in the processor, as we seen, it is saying that INO. So it was expecting INO as a generic INO, but we need to define which specific thing we are passing. That's why we need to typecast this chunk to employee DTO and employee entity. So our our compilation issue went off. What else we did? We have added at component annotation, which I forgot to add in our employee processor. So yes, our step is ready. So next in the architecture is job. So we have to create the job object. So let's create our job object similarly like this. So public job, let me create it really fast. So what is it? It is import employees job method. We can give any name. So here we likewise for step, we have used step builder. We have something called as job builder. So return new job builder. Yeah, we are going to use the job builder, and if we go inside this job builder, we can see there are two methods. One is deprecated, no need, so we have to pass the job name and the job repository. So I want to give this as just some employee job or some job, and the job repository, as we know, we already know that is job repository, so I'll just copy paste it from here, and I'm going to use the same repository here. All well and good. So what are the other features that our job have? Let's see. Our job has a start of step, so we need to pass our step information here. So I have implemented this method start. There are like three things, but we have created the step, that is why I am using this start. And where is our step? This is our step. So to our step we need to pass three things. One is repository. So repository I already have, I will pass it, and I need platform transaction manager and employee repository. So where I have the platform transaction manager here as this thing, this variable, yeah, I have it already, and I will give it as a variable here, platform transaction manager of platform transaction manager. I'll just maybe give it as transaction manager, and I'll use it here. And what else this needs? It needs the employee repository, so I can similarly create the employee repository as well here. So all well and good. Let's create employee repository and pass that employee repository here. So next, what else we have? So if I have any next step, I can add that step, but for us we have only one step. So for the demo we have created only one step, so I didn't mention it, and I can give build here. So also this has some property called, what is it, incrementer. So if you want to provide the incrementer, we can provide it. So let's provide the incrementer also. There is something called as run, it's our choice. There is something called as run ID incrementer. I'm using that incrementer, which is again provided by the Spring Batch. So I'm just using it. We have created our job as well. So we have created our job. So a job can have multiple steps. My job has only one step, and I have provided that step here. If you want to add one more step, you can provide your step here, but mine has only one step. And again, if you go inside this step, so your each step will have reader, processor and writer. So I have provided my reader, processor and writer. So all well and good. We have created everything we need. Then we need a controller class, and that controller class, what do it need to do? It needs to trigger the job that we have created. So for that, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a controller. So I'm going to create a controller. I'm just naming it as like whatever it is, run job controller. So all usual things, at rest controller, at request mapping /bracket/v1/ what is it, spring batch demo. I'll give it, and we need to have a mapping that will be a post mapping. I'll just give some name /jobs. It's all our choice, public, any method name. So we are going to convert CSV. Okay, what is it going to return? It is not going to return anything, so void. So it is going to convert the CSV, and it needs to store it to the database. So I'll just these are all our wish. So all well and good. So for job, we have something called as job parameters. If you remember in the, okay, I will open that as well. Just a minute, I'll open the architecture and I'll explain you. So in this architecture diagram, if you see, we have something called as job parameters. This is nothing but if I want to pass any parameters to my job, I can pass through using this job parameters. So even now, what are we going to do? We are going to pass some job parameters to our job. What is the parameter that we are going to send? It is nothing but the file, where my file is located. That specific thing we are going to pass using this job parameters. So let's go to the code and write job parameters there. So let's write our job parameters here. So job parameters, I'll show you. Similarly for the job parameters also, we have a job parameters builder. So we are going to use that job parameter builder only. So job parameters builder, you can see here. And let's see what are the parameters it has. So sorry, as usual, I forgot new. So you can see that we can add as many job parameters as we want. So I'm going to add long. So what is that? I'm just going to log when my job is starting. So I'm providing it as starting at, and I'm just going to give system current milliseconds only, so that it will print when the job is started. And I'm going to add one more parameter, and that parameter is nothing but the input file path. And I need to provide the path here. So what is my path? My path is nothing but src main resources along with the file name. Yes, I will provide the path here. So where my employee sample data.csv is located, it is inside my src main resources folder. So that's what I have mentioned here, and that's it. I don't want to pass any other parameters. So what I'll do is I'll just give dot two job parameters of. So that's it. I have created our job parameters. So I have created my job parameter. I need to pass that job parameter to my job. That is one thing. And the other thing is, only if I call this endpoint, I need to trigger my job. So as you remember in the architecture diagram, which is starting the job, it is nothing but the job launcher. So we have something called as job launcher. We are just going to use it, the Spring Batches one, and we have something called as job. We are going to use that also, the same Spring Batch one. So I have created my parameters, and I'm going to use this parameters job launcher dot run off. I need to pass a job and my job parameters. So job parameters I have created. I'm going to run it. So you can see that there is some compilation error, nothing but like I want to surround it with try and catch. Oh my god, why these many? So we can collapse, and collapse. I just want to print the stack trace, so I'll just remove it and print. So that's it. So in my controller class, what I have created a post mapping endpoint, and that endpoint, what it is going to do, that is going to run my job. So if you remember in the application YAML file, so I have by default, I have enabled the job to false. Only if I trigger this endpoint which I am created, my job will get executed. Also make sure that you need to add JDBC initialize schema : always, else you will get some other issues. So make sure that you have added this thing in your application YAML file. And we have in our catch block, like we are starting our job using this job launcher dot run of job. And if we have any parameters we need to pass, do I have any parameters? Yes, I have this parameter, which is nothing but when the job is starting, and I am adding and I am mentioning that where my file is located. So if you remember, I told you guys that I will let you know something later, which is nothing but in the reader. If you see here in the file system resource, so what I have provided job parameters of input file path. So this one only I have provided. So in my job parameters, I have something called as input file path. So use that here. So use that as your file system resource. That's what I have mentioned. So if we provide our path here, and if we give this at value annotation of job parameters of input file path, this specific job while running the reader will get its value for file system resource from this job parameter of input file path. So it will pick it up from the sorry, it will pick it up. Yeah, it will pick it up from this job parameter path. If you give some other name here, make sure that you provide the same value here. So since this is the path for the input file, I have provided this name. So any name we can provide, it's not mandatory that we need to provide this thing only. So what we can do is let's run our project and see what happens. We have did a lot of coding. So okay, I can see some issue. What is it? So connection refused to. Looks like my Postgres is not started. I'll go to my Postgres. Yeah, it got started automatically. So I'll start the application and again and I check. Okay, one more time. Property or field job parameters cannot be found on being maybe not public or valid. Let's see what it is. So something related to my job parameter. So what is it? Building. I couldn't see any problem here. So let me minimize all these and let me find anything is wrong. So that was related to job parameters. Okay, so one more thing I forgot. I need to add a required args constructor and final here. So if you remember, I have added one video for common Spring mistakes wherein we forgot to add this final keyword. Even I have forgot. So this mistake we should not do. We already have a video for this common Spring mistakes. If you want, I'll provide the description. You can go through it if you have any interest. Other than that, so what is it? Sorry, what is it exactly saying? It's saying that property for field. Okay, so is there anything else? So it's saying that it is not able to create the bean with reader through the expression or dependency expressed through the method parameter 0. So it's saying something is wrong with the reader. So and it is saying that parameter 0, this is my parameter 0. Oh, it is not able to parse it. So yeah, sorry, I forgot to mention you something. So there is one annotation called as at step scope. So if you see here, we need to use this at step scope annotation if we are parsing anything with at value annotation of step execution dot step name. So if we are using this at value annotation over like in my method parameter, I need to use this at step scope. I think this should be the issue. It is because I didn't add step scope and it is saying that it is not able to what is it? It is not able to parse this parameter. Let's see. So let me have a look one more time. I don't find any issues here. Other than that, in my controller, I have added final at required args constructor. I think it should work. Let's see. So yes, it's working fine. Let's go to our Postman and see what happens. So I have created that Postman request. It's a post request with no body. Let's hit it and see what happens. I've got status as 200. Let me open that. What is it? Let me open the IntelliJ. Oh my god, where is it? So let me open the IntelliJ and IntelliJ. Let's see. So what I can see is I didn't see any issues executing the step, executing the job. Yeah. So I couldn't see any issues and we can see that it has started at this time and the status as completed. So let's go to our Postgres and see. So I'll open the Postgres, Spring Security. Okay, why it is not coming? So okay, so I'll open it. Let's see. Yeah, okay. So if you see here, we are able to see something called as employee details. This is what the table that we have created. And let's select star from employee details and let's see whether all are, sorry, what is it? I'll type it instead, employee underscore details, and let's see. So if you see here, you are now able to see like all those 1,000 records has been saved to my database. So it didn't take much time. With a fraction of seconds, we completed everything. It is because of the Spring Batch. This is what we need. So for even for a single record in the real time Spring Boot application where we are going to trying to persist or post something, it will take some time. But the Spring Batch saved all these 1,000 records in a fraction of seconds. That is why we need Spring Batch. So that is what it is, and you can see that we have added some more check in our business requirement that our job title should not be vice president. Let's go and check whether we have any vice president. No, we are not having it. It is because we skipped those records. So we don't have vice president as well, and we are able to process all our records. And one more thing I want to tell you is that if you see here, these employee IDs, those will not be in the same order that we have in the CSV. It is because the Spring Batch will consider the data as chunks, and it will process those chunks, like first those 100 chunks. So the order of saving it in the database may not be in the same order as in the CSV. So this we need to understand. And also if you see here, these leave that address. Other than that, we have tables called batch job execution parameters. These tables we didn't create, but we have. So let's try and see what we have in those details. What is it? Batch job execution, and see what is there. Oh my god, something is wrong. Batch job execution, select star from, what is it? Syntax error at line number 1. What is it? Select star from batch job execution. Yeah, okay. So if you see here, it has some information. So it is saying that at first this job got failed. What is it? Today's date? No, it's 2nd May, right? We need to check for 2nd May. So, oh my god. So even like I was doing it even before, so that's why all these. So if we see here, basically in this table you will have all the information about your job that you have executed. So that is if it is failed in the first time, you will have that information. If it is failed in the second time, you will have that information. Basically you will have that information about the jobs in this table. So similarly for the step execution, if you see, you will have that information. So sorry, I'll give /tt. So you can see you have similarly for all the other things. Suppose if you want to see batch job execution params, let's go and check what it is. Select, spelling is wrong again, it will complain. Select star from batch job execution. So let's give enter. So you can see that, oh, I have given the same table name, is it, instead of parameters. So I have selected that table batch job execution params, and you can see that our job parameters are present here. So we have defined starting at an input file path, and those two are here, and one is long and one is string. Yes, this is starting at at what time my batch job got started, and you can see that what is the input file path. So all the job parameters that you set for your job, you can see from here. And like I have yesterday I did like many changes, that's why you have these many. But like for you to understand, the last thing that we executed is starting at this time, and this is the input file path. So anything related to your job parameters, you need to see in this job params table. So anything related to the step, if you want to see, you can see in the step table. Anything related to your job instance, you need to check in your batch job instance table. So even if it is failed, you will have like along with the error description why it is failed, you will have in this batch job execution table. So this will be really helpful for you if your batch job in production got failed for some reason, because you will get to know why it got failed using the contents in this batch job execution table. So that is it. I hope it is clear for you on how you can use Spring Batch in your applications if you have to process millions of records. That too in a very within a fraction of seconds. I hope this video is clear, and thanks for watching Crack It. So please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Also, please share the channel to all your friends who are preparing for the interviews. And if you like the content, please make sure that you like the video and comment it. Stay tuned for updates.